Now, over the last month, there have been sweeping and often chaotic changes in policy, including executive orders, some of which are illegal or unconstitutional. And there's been a lot of rhetoric, but I think there's been a real disconnect between the rhetoric and what we've seen in practice. And there's probably no area where that's been more true than immigration, where there has clearly been an effort to divide people and to instill fear. And so the goal with today's roundtable discussion was to better understand how folks in the Green Bay area are thinking about these issues and feeling about them. And I will tell you, it was really impactful to hear from people in the community about what they're seeing and what they're hearing. There were a lot of questions, but there were also a lot of things that are of significant concern. One is somebody talked to me about how school enrollment has declined recently in light of this. And I want to stress that every kid in the United States has a right to a public school education. We don't want to live in a society where kids are afraid to go to school. That is contrary to our public safety, it's contrary to our economy, and it's contrary to the strength of our communities. We also heard from a business person who talked about how he's seen a decline in business as some of the folks who would show up for events have stopped showing up. And then we heard from a woman who explained that she was a naturalized citizen, but she was concerned that she may be detained. And she said, I don't know who I would call if I needed to reach out for immigration help. What we are doing at the Wisconsin Department of Justice is working to ensure that the rights of all Wisconsinites are protected. So the day after the president signed the immigration order that significantly reduced birthright citizenship, we joined a number of other AGs in filing a lawsuit challenging that order. Now, birthright citizenship is literally written into the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. We have U.S. Supreme Court precedent on our side, and we have federal law on our side. And not surprisingly, courts have ruled in our favor so far. That case is still making its way through the courts, but the courts have been clear so far that birthright citizenship is protected by the Constitution. We also joined a brief in a case where somebody else filed it, but that relates to programs in place for refugees to this country. It's important to be clear about who these people are. These are people who've gone through a rigorous vetting process and in many cases are here in the United States right now. And what the administration has done, the federal administration, is shut down the programs that help those folks get work authorization and get job training, help them get settled in the United States. Well, it doesn't serve the interest of those families or of public safety to have people who are here in the U.S. but stranded in this legal limbo. So again, there we took action. At the Department of Justice, we are going to work to protect the rights of Wisconsinites. We can do that while simultaneously having a rational immigration system, having a secure border, and having laws that are enforced. But what is not consistent with that is the kind of chaos that we have seen with executive orders and with rhetoric that doesn't match the reality of what's happening. So it's important that we continue to have these kinds of community conversations. I think one of the best antidotes to efforts to divide people is for folks to come together and to communicate. And I look forward to more of that as we move forward. So thanks for being here. Eric?
Well, thanks so much to our Attorney General, Kaul, and our Representative Rivera-Wagner, Ahmad for organizing, and our Attorney General from coming up from Madison to participate in this discussion with community members. Our priority from the City of Green Bay's perspective is to have a safe and strong community. And that was reiterated time and again by participants today. And as the Attorney General said, when there's a chaotic series of policies that are unveiled, that's very detrimental to the safety and the strength of this community. And so, bringing people together to have a constructive conversation with community members and community organizations was really beneficial to me in my role as mayor. And I would just reiterate something that our police chief and police staff have said continuously since some of these policies have come down. The federal government has a role to play in enforcing immigration law, obviously. We have a very serious role to play in enforcing local and state laws and just keeping our community safe. And that's what we will continue to do. We also have no interest in harboring dangerous criminals within this community. And so when there are opportunities to collaborate with federal law enforcement officials and ridding Green Bay of those dangerous criminals, that has happened and that will continue to happen. but we have a significantly important role to play in our everyday lives and the work that's done every single day by our police department and by our community, and we'll continue to do that. But just again, wanted to thank our Attorney General for coming up here, for answering questions, for being open to our community members. Green Bay has been and will continue to be a place for everybody. Everybody of goodwill is welcome here. We are a city, a state, and a nation of immigrants, and we would be much lesser if not for that heritage and that future, which will continue. So with that, again, thanks to Representative Rivera-Wagner for bringing us together, and Attorney General Kaul for his presence today.
I guess we can take like one or two questions. Yes.
I have a question for Attorney General Kaul, if that's all right. Hi, I'm Vivian. I'm with the Green Bay Press Gazette. I was just curious. We know that a lot of immigration arrests happen out of our county jails, and so with that knowledge, that does put a significant responsibility on local law enforcement when it comes to immigration enforcement. It is not out of their hands. So how much should local law enforcement be cooperating with ICE, and should lawmakers be, or can they force these enforcement or law enforcement agencies to help ICE?
Yeah, well, I would point back to what the mayor said before, which is I think that the priority of anybody in law enforcement ought to be public safety. And the decisions that our sheriffs and police chiefs make, I know that they are focused on what's in the best interest of public safety. Likewise, for us at the Department of Justice, we are making decisions based on public safety. And so if there is an investigation where we are working together with, say, Homeland Security investigations, and that maybe that some of the folks who are the subject of the investigation are undocumented, if there are people committing violent crimes or dangerous crimes that put our community at risk, absolutely we're going to investigate folks and hold them accountable. At the same time, what we've been hearing from this administration is something very different from that. We've been hearing about opening up the door to potential raids at schools or churches. And while I don't think that's going to happen, and I certainly hope it doesn't happen, we're not going to be making our communities safer by having ICE raids in schools in our communities. That's not where hardened criminals are hanging out. So we've got to make sure we're doing this in a way that is thoughtful and focused on public safety, and not, as I think we've unfortunately seen, where it's focused on political rhetoric and trying to create a climate of fear and division.
Yeah, I've got one for Representative Rivera-Wagner or for Mayor Kaul. So how do you mentioned these fears folks have of some of going to school or going out in public. How do you assuage those fears for people that are worried about these kind of raids maybe that Attorney General Kaul is talking about?
Well, one of the things that we also heard with the fear is that there is a real concern that people are mistaking people's status with criminality. And that the truth is that the, immigrant communities and folks who've come here for different ways want the same violent, bad criminals arrested as well. They just don't want to be treated as criminals. And so one of the things that I thought was really powerful is our local police department talking about making sure that people feel safe to call them in an emergency, and that their status shouldn't stand in the way between them getting the help that they need, particularly if they are victims of a crime. And so I think this meeting was about bringing different folks and institutions together to center that piece, that the goal of our local government and our local work is to make sure every single person feels safe regardless of status, that we are holding criminals accountable regardless of their status, but that we are a community rooted in taking care of each other. That's kind of the Green Bay way. And we want to make sure those values are communicated to our residents regardless of the national rhetoric. So I'm actually incredibly proud of this meeting, to have the AG here and the mayor, because we reiterated the values that we've always had, that we are going to take care and create a safe community. And Green Bay is one of the safest communities in Wisconsin because of the way that we do our police work. And I want to make sure that that is enshrined and communicated to the residents. Mayor.
No, that's well said.
Any other questions?
One for the Attorney General. So given the executive orders, what would you say to people that think that you'd be obstructing the President's orders on immigration?
Well, we are a nation of laws, and the President has a lot of authority in his role. That's, we have elections, and elections have consequences. And so I'm not at all surprised to see a shift in federal policy. And in some respects, that's well within the President's rights. The way that immigration policy is set, for example, enforcement priorities, for instance, can be set by the president. I personally think it's critical that we use our resources at ICE, but also at other law enforcement agencies to focus on doing the most we can to protect public safety, and I hope that's the approach the administration will ultimately take. But at the same time, we do have laws in place that limit what authority the president has, and we have a constitution that protects all of our rights. And to the extent that the president and his administration are engaging in actions that cross those lines, we're prepared to step up and protect people's rights. Unfortunately, what we have seen in the first month or so of the Trump administration is a flagrant disregard for the laws that are in place and for constitutional protections. And a perfect example of this is the effort to roll back birthright citizenship. It's written into the language of our U.S. Constitution. And the U.S. Supreme Court has clearly ruled on this. So by saying that folks who are part of the federal government should be denying citizenship documentation to kids who are born in the U.S. is a violation of our Constitution. It's a violation of our laws. And so while the president has the right to set policy, he does not have the authority to violate the laws in the Constitution. That's why we've stepped up. It's not surprising that we have so far been very successful in that case, and I expect that we're going to continue to be successful.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, that's
Awesome. Just for anybody who wants to answer, you've spoken a lot about how the importance of transparency from our local law enforcement in getting rid of this culture of fear. Myself and my colleagues have had a lot of trouble receiving the same transparency from sheriffs throughout the state. And of course they are a little bit more closely tied with immigration enforcement than our police departments are. Should sheriffs be transparent with the public about their immigration policies? Is that something that is a little bit more acceptable to keep close to the chest? And how is that affecting the culture of fear that is being felt?
Yeah, so first, I can't speak to any experience you've had with anybody, so I'm not commenting on that at all. What I would say, though, generally speaking, is it's important for everybody in government to be transparent to the extent they can, and that certainly includes law enforcement, but it also includes city council members, mayor's offices, elected members of the legislature, because it's appropriate that people know what's going on. Where I've been concerned about transparency, actually, is with what we're seeing from the federal government. I'll give you an example. With the federal funding freeze, which was issued, I forget how early in the Trump administration it was, but it was very early on, there has been all sorts of uncertainty about precisely what that's meant or which funds are being frozen and which aren't. There's been a lot of secrecy around whatever it is that DOJ is doing. And so I think getting some transparency from the federal government about what's happening and what the policies are is really key. And it's one of the things we're seeing around immigration as well. I think a lot of the fear we have heard, that we heard about today, relates not to specific actions that have been taken, but to rhetoric that's been out there. So discussions about raids at schools or raids at churches. Again, I actually think it's unlikely that those will happen. I certainly hope that they don't. But that rhetoric has created fear. And I think it's fair to communities across the country to know what the administration is actually doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
It was fantastic.
Thank you.
We have gone so over time, and I'm
Oh, that's
so
all right.
sorry.
Yeah.